Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. So this time I'm going to be having a little bit of a chat about quests and Warlords of Draenor, and just kind of giving my thoughts based off all of the stuff that we've heard. Though first of all, like, to talk about the Warlords of Draenor changes and that kind of thing, we need to step back a bit, examine how quests have been throughout World of Warcraft, and the good things and the bad things, and then hopefully we can sort of work out how Warlords may improve some of these, or perhaps completely ruin them. Hey, you never know. So, questing. Well, when I joined the game, it was the Burning Crusade, and that meant that my first character had to go through the traditional version of all the zones. It took a very long time, much longer than it currently does, and hell, that was even accelerated because of the XP nerfs that they, or boosts, nerfs, whatever that they put in. But basically, questing was a lot different back then, and I'm not really going to be talking about speed, more just the design. It was still the ultra traditional, you know, get 10 bear butts and a dragon arse, and, you know, combine them into something, give that to an NPC, blah blah blah. That wasn't, well, for the time it was kind of revolutionary, which is hilarious when you think about it. Previously, it literally was grinding 1,000 boars, but as time went on, it just didn't really hold up. Then, of course, the Burning Crusade happens, and that was a zone, or, well, an expansion that I really enjoyed the questing of my first time through. Even places like Nagrand just sort of worked, and I think what was great for me in a lot of those places is it really felt like a journey going through Outland. The quests definitely pulled you through that, and I think you were always going to relatively different and iconic locations, especially in terms of, like, bases and things. Like, even in Terragor Forest, you would, you know, you'd, like, be at that Night Elf place, then you'd go to Illyrian Stronghold, to Shatrath. There's a lot of variation there. Hell, even in Zangarmarsh, you started off with a Night Elf place, then you're in a Mushroom, and I just thought that was really cool about Outland. Though, of course, my favourite questing is definitely Wrath of the Lich King. And what I think was great about Wrath of the Lich King is that it was that mix of the Burning Crusade quest flow with the good parts of the Cataclysm or Miss Pandaria variety of questing, in that they did have the odd unique story quest that gave you a big bit of lore with some big characters and all that stuff. And for me, it was just that flow. There were enough side quests to give you variation and choice, but not so much that you just went into town, got a million quests, and then, well, maybe anyone who is familiar with the old version of Darkshire even would know that back in the day you just get one quest for the opposite side of the zone with no flight point. Stuff like that didn't really happen as much in Wrath, which was nice. And overall, I just think it was really nicely designed. Every single zone was, not every single, but most zones were pretty different. I mean, even Dragonblight and Storm Peaks were different, but then you had Sholazar Basin, Howling Fjord, Grizzly Hills, all these different zones with stories that were different yet connected, which I think really worked. Then also, just from a storytelling perspective, I think Wrath of the Lich King probably has done the best job. Now, I know a lot of people say that Arthas ended up being a bit like a comic book character, and my response to that is, of course, and that's why it's good. World of Warcraft lore is not high and mighty. That's something I've came to realize. It's poorly written, it's often poorly voice acted, but what suits that style the best is the villain popping up and saying, I'll get you again, because at least you get to interact with the villain, unlike with Deathwing or Illidan or something like that. I was completely okay with Arthas just popping up and saying hello and not killing us, because I thought it was cool. It was cool in that Saturday morning cartoon comic book way, but maybe with a slightly more serious tone. I think Warcraft can really strike a great blend between a like a cartoon comic book style thing and trying to be sort of serious. That blend is something they can do really well when they do it, which is rarely, admittedly, but I think that really just held me through with Wrath of the Lich King quite a bit. And then, of course, it was nice that when you finally did get flying at level 67, it allowed for some cool zones. Though, of course, flying, like, it would have ruined the other zones while questing up the first time, but obviously the Storm Peaks kind of required it, though they could certainly get around that by having robust flight points, or maybe some sort of, I don't know, cool, interesting wall climbing mechanic or something, I don't know. I don't think any of the zones in Draenor will really require anything like that. Still, though, it was nice just how different Iceground and the Storm Peaks felt, and also with Iceground, just how, like, bloody dangerous it looked. Most of the zone was a whole bunch of dead soldiers from your faction, which was kind of effective, actually. I like that. But then we moved on to Cataclysm. Now, I don't like Cataclysm quests. I think one of the major problems is that they were hyperlinear. You went from one hub to another the whole way through, and that really was very annoying when you were in the big endgame zones. I'm actually okay with it in the revamped zones for Cataclysm, because those revamped zones, you just want to get your story and get through the zone, and usually they can have these, these new Cataclysm style quests can do that quite well. They give you a rough idea of what's going on, you get to see the zone, you get to see the stuff, and then you move on. That's nice. But for zones like Hyjal and the Twilight Highlands, do you really want the ultra-linear stuff? I don't think you want it as much, because you are approaching the end game, you're up there in the big boy zones where you'd imagine that because you're a stronger hero, you're able to have a little bit more choice in what you do, but that was unfortunately taken away in Cataclysm. However, Cataclysm isn't my least favourite. Actually, I dislike Pandaria more, and I'll talk about that later. But one of the things that Cataclysm at least did quite well is that every zone was different. That's one thing you can't deny. Uldum, very different from Hyjal. Even Hyjal had a lot of differences within itself. You started off, top of a big old tree, and then later on, there's fire everywhere, and I actually think that Hyjal was a pretty fun zone. I know a lot of people didn't enjoy it, but yeah. Then Vashir, look, if you wanted to go to Vashir, you could, and if you went there, you probably enjoyed it because you knew what you were getting into. But every zone was different and varied, and I think that's probably what held it through most of the way for me. Though the linearity did start to hurt, and it really just turned into a bit of a grind, which I thought was really unfortunate. It's the kind of thing that's a slog, honestly, and no, not nice at all. And then also, there were maybe slightly too many gimmick quests, I think, in that, like, it would just get ridiculous sometimes. Those Harrison Jones quests, oh, I hated them. I get it, a bit of comic relief, but in your 5th time through, you don't want to deal with that shit. And then, of course, one of my other problems with Cataclysm is that it was not replayable in the slightest, because the first time through, all the gimmick quests and things could at least hold you through with the story. But after that, the problem turned into just the quest flow being linear and boring, and there being not that much exploration. So that's really what was a pity there. And then Pandaria did actually, in some regards, open up the questing a little bit, but it was still very linear, it was still very much in the same vein as the Cataclysm stuff, but there's a key difference, which I think is why Pandaria, one of its key failings anyway, why it didn't really work out so well for me. And that is that every zone felt the same. Not every zone, and not the exact same, but similar, too similar. It's not like you're moving from some sort of verdant forest / fiery wasteland to a desert or to the sea. You're moving from one variation of a forest to another green place to a dense jungle. They're all very foresty and samey, and just the art style of all the various assets, they were, of course, all Asian inspired, which is what worked for Pandaria, but because of that, even zones which were slightly different, say a jungle versus a forest, they still felt the same. They really did. And I think it wasn't really until Kunlai Summit that you saw a zone that actually felt different. And even Kunlai was a bit dull to me, honestly, apart from the times when we actually got to go up into the cool mountain bit. And then, of course, Taolong Steppes just felt the same as Karasang Wilds. It felt a little bit too similar to the Jade Forest. You were just hyper-linearly dragged through the Taolong Steppes, and then the same thing happened with Dread Wastes. Just the Dread Wastes was further compounded by the fact that you were there at a ground mount, which, by the way, as you know, I'm completely pro the removal of flying mounts in Draenor, but with a zone designed like the Dread Wastes, and the mob densities that were there, which were honestly just truly ludicrous, it was a pain, it was just a pain in the arse to level in. And that's basically the brief history of World of Warcraft leveling and what I think about it. Really, one of the largest problems with the newer style of leveling is replayability. I think Draenor is going to fix it, but obviously with wow, words. I mean, come on, this is supposed to be my job, right? No, the problem with the replayability aspect of Cataclysm and Pandaria especially is that as you go through those expansions again in your second character, you've done the story, you've done the gimmick quests before, so the gimmick is now lost on you, and it's just more annoyances, it's more action bars to appear and deal with, and it's just a hassle. Then another problem, especially with Pandaria, is that there isn't enough zone choice. If you were to go all the way back to, say, Wrath of the Lich King, you had a lot of zone choice there. You could start off in either the Borean Tundra or the Howling Fjord, then you can move into the Grizzling Hills or Dragonblight, not Zulgrub, you know, the troll place, Sholazar Basin, and then you had the final choice of Icecrown or the Storm Peaks. There was a lot of variation there, and that really did help replayability. You could probably get 3 characters through there before you'd completely seen everything. And I think that was absolutely a very worthwhile thing. Now, if you move into Pandaria, well, you go through the Jade Forest, then you go through either the Valley of the Four Winds or Karasang Wilds, both of which are kind of boring zones. I actually prefer Four Winds a little bit more, but bar that, you don't have much choice. Now, Draenor. Let's talk about Draenor and how it's going to fix all these things. First of all, it's got the new questing system. You guys all know about that. I've talked about it in videos before. Basically, every zone's got its main story quests, which are a bit more linear. They've removed, I don't know many, but most of the side quests, and they are now baked into objectives, which seem to be a little bit Guild Wars 2-esque. I mean that you can just go to a zone, an objective pops up and says, hey, you're in a fort now, go kill the orcs, because then the fort will be yours. That's more emergent, and I think overall it's going to be a far better system. We're still going to get those fantastic stories and that kind of thing. Okay, they'll be a bit more linear, but it will allow Blizzard to tell the story they want to tell through those zones, using the cool, you know, solo scenarios and quests and all that stuff, which is great. I think that's fine. But the nice thing is that instead of always having to do the same damn quests in terms of the side quests and all that on every character, well, those side quests are going to be optional. Various things like that are going to be optional, and because it's modeled a little bit after the Timeless Isles, what's going to happen is you can just find a treasure, go kill a rare mob, do all these various things, which are varied. I think the increase in variation in Draenor is really going to help questing a lot. Actually, it's just questing at the minute, it's all the same, you know, but at least in Draenor, you could have an event pop up, you could have, you know, you could be doing different variations of side quests and that kind of thing. Now, one thing that I don't know is the zone variation. Of course, we have moved up to using 10 levels per expansion, which I suppose may mean that there'll be a little bit more zone choice. I guess. Blizzard definitely have said, though, that they understand the problem with there only being 2 choices and how that wasn't enough. So I'm not too sure how much they're going to actually, you know, recognize what they previously said and make a leveling path that's not 100% linear, you know, zone to zone to zone, and one that maybe gives us 1 or 2 choices in the zones that we choose. That would be very good. So yeah, overall from a gameplay perspective, I think the Warlords of Draenor questing is going to be a decent improvement. Sure, the main quests, the stories will be hyper-linear, whatever, but I think it's the side quests, or objectives, whatever you're going to call them, and the variation that's going to help out a lot. Actually, it really should help out. And I'm definitely looking forward to it. I can't wait to get into the alpha or the beta or whatever, if I ever get into that, or just the full-on game, and give these things a shot, because what I've seen of the quests there look really nice, and there's just so much potential. Now, another topic to talk about for questing is story. I think story is extremely important in a game like World of Warcraft, because it gives the kind of the backdrop in which all these quests happen, and that backdrop is extremely important. I firmly believe that one of the things which led to Wrath of the Lich King being my favourite questing experience is the fact that it was dark. Okay, it was comic book dark. You did have the Lich King popping up and saying, "Ah, I will kill your souls next time," or "You are all falling into my cunning plan," which I suppose we did until bloody YOLO Tyrannus Menethil appeared at the very end of the fight and, you know, raised us all from the dead. It was pretty nice of him. But still, it had a story that was more dark. It was based on death and bad things. And what did that allow for? It allowed for really cool quests. Look at the Utgard Keep things, where, you know, the Lich King was sort of floating in, and we got to see the lore about where humans came from, the Vrykul children. It allowed for the Wrathgate. It allowed for some of the really fantastic quests in Icecrown Citadel with saving soldiers from the undead, and all those various really cool things that I really did. I'm saying really a lot, but I loved them. I thought that it just allowed for better questing. And okay, you go into Sholazar Basin, you get a bit of a difference there. But even in Zul'Drag, which is a zone that I didn't like, you still had some cool quests with the Argent Crusade. And if you were to go into Icecrown, the initial assault and the securing of the foothold in Icecrown Citadel is one of the best quest chains I've ever seen. Is it linear? Yes. Does it have a great story? Yes. And I think a little bit of a hyperlinear experience is okay from time to time if it's used to really just communicate an epic moment. And I think a dark storyline allows for, this sounds cheesy as hell, but allows for the light to prevail more. I don't mean that in terms of a lore standpoint, but the more sort of dark your storyline is, then when there's a badass moment or an epic thing happening, then that's enhanced. And that really was important with the questing experience of Wrath. In Cataclysm, that just didn't happen, because so many of the zones were more whimsical, Deathwing wasn't much of a threat, and honestly, this is just a personal thing, but I couldn't care less for the Twilight's Hammer cult. And then in Pandaria, come on. I know they were trying to be dark with a Shah and all that, but I don't think many people would agree that it actually pulled off well, or that they pulled it off well. I think Blizzard actually did a pretty decent job telling the Garrosh story, but the initial Pandaria thing was so bad. I actually was listening to a video by a Preach, a while ago, I think it was 2 days ago, and he was talking about basically when he was alpha test or beta testing, I think, Pandaria, that the Jade Forest was a terrible zone, and then they, ended up, just the feedback meant that Blizzard remade the zone, and it was still really bad. Like, we were promised a war for Pandaria. At BlizzCon, they sort of infamously said that Pandaria is going to be a Horde versus Alliance war expansion. Yet, they never really pulled that off, because they got distracted by the Shah, they got distracted by the little quirks of Pandaria, and it just took away from having this cool dark undertone to the expansion. I mean, hell, they squandered an old god. When was Yasharaj cool? Maybe he was cool in the final boss fight, maybe he was cool in the patch 5.4 cinematic, but I just don't think Blizzard pulled it off that well. Now, the story of Warlords of Draenor is pretty good, and one of the nice things about it is that it kind of lends itself well to some of the comic book storytelling, that Blizzard do, where it's all about being a badass hero that, goes in, says a few cheesy lines, whips out a giant axe, and it's the kind of thing, it's not high and mighty, but you revel in it. You revel in it. It's like with some of the dumb shit the Lich King says in that fight. Yeah, it's cheesy, but you know what? It's fun. And I think Blizzard should be able to pull that off. It's weird, actually. They started trying to make lots of bespoke fun in terms of Harrison Jones, but I don't think they realized that there was so much fun in just having their cheesy villain come in, do a, badass thing, and have some sort of paladin or something fly in, all those cool little moments. And they just try to replace that with real humor, and I don't think they pull it off that well. So hopefully Warlords is going to improve that. The backdrop of the expansion is the world being invaded by a bunch of angry orcs. They've got all the Grosh stuff going on. I think it could be great. At least the vibe that they've been saying or, showing us, I think will work quite well. I know a lot of people are saying, OMG, so savage, so brutal, much death, much orc, blah, blah, blah. You know what? I like that. I think that's Warcraft. That's fundamentally Warcraft. The World of Warcraft, in my head, stopped feeling like a Warcraft game in terms of its story. Or in terms of it was a few aspects anyway, once Cataclysm came out, and I just think they lost a bit of the heart of the game, and it seems like they're trying to recapture the heart of the game with this expansion. If you just look at so many of the changes they're making, just to everything, including quests, it just definitely feels like they're trying to go back to the roots, go back to basics, and revamp the new and interesting features in a way that just sort of makes a better game. It's like they've put in a lot of features as a band-aid, like a bandage fix to sort of quickly think, oh no, friends and family guilds are left out, oh, what do we do? Oh, a raid finder. Or, we don't know how to tell a good story, hyperlinear hub quests. I think they're going to be able to take these ideas and then fully bring them to fruition. That's what it sounds like anyway. I'm not too sure if there are really many other quest things to talk about. I suppose I could talk about the level 100 stuff. We're going to have quests from our garrisons. Actually, no, garrisons, I'll talk about that first. Yeah, the whole leveling experience of Draenor is actually intertwined with your garrison, which means that as you go through Draenor, you rank up with your garrison, and it's kind of like your stronghold on the planet. I think that's great. I love that. I really, really do. It gives you a home, like a base. It gives you meaningful downtime. One of the things that I really liked about say Mass Effect is you had that really meaningful downtime in the Normandy. And I think that they might be able to pull off a similar vibe in Warcraft. I'll probably talk more about garrisons in one of these discussion videos, with them being the central topic, but I think garrisons will help out with the questing experience. Then another thing that's nice is we're going to have this mix of patch 5.1 epic story quest and Timeless Isle exploration and that kind of thing, I think that's going to work out really well. And one thing actually about the Timeless Isle, I know some people have been kind of, hating on it and stuff, but when I go back to the Timeless Isle and I type in /who, it's always pretty busy. And I know that's probably because of the easy epics, but certainly I think there's probably more people that are playing around with that for longer than we've perhaps had with the troll stuff in the 5.2 island. Then, of course, I think they will be adding a few dailies. I remember them saying that they're basically just going to go for a mix of everything that they've had before, but of course less daily, because, they're now a bad word. Though, honestly, I don't think daily quests themselves are the problem. Are they inherently repetitive? Yes. Are they inherently awful for your game? No. It's just that when Pandaria launched, they had Zerg mode dungeons, they had Zerg mode scenarios, which meant that once a lot of the casual player base geared up, did a few LFRs, all they had to do was just grind daily quests, whereas I think a few decent dailies can actually work. I remember playing Cataclysm, or not Cataclysm, no, in Wrath of the Lich King, doing my Venture Port dailies, which are pretty fun, and all those various things. I thought it was engaging, and the nice thing is that I always felt like I was doing those dailies of my own volition, rather than kind of being forced into it by a lack of other things to do. Because in Pandaria, you certainly were not forced into doing those dailies, other than if you were a professional person. And because the gear, like, you didn't need it after you did some LFR, and then with later patches they opened it up anyway, and just dailies. Still, I think a mixture of dailies, a mixture of 5.1 quests, and then lots of Timeless Isle stuff will be great. From what I've heard, I forget the exact sums they were talking about, but they gave the numbers of rares, treasures, etc. that were in the Timeless Isle, and I think every Draenor zone is going to have slightly more than that in the zone itself, so we're going to have a lot of treasures, a lot of rare mobs, just a lot of cool stuff to find, and that will be at max level, but also during the questing experience, which really will help it out a lot. Alright, now finally I'm going to talk about flying. I didn't want to say this at the top of the video because obviously people have already heard my thoughts on flying, but it is very relevant to this topic. I think the flying, or the lack of flying even, is vital to quests being meaningful. If you if you put flying into the game and then allow people to quest, what it does is it makes every single quest you just going from node to node, killing a thing. It doesn't matter if that node is behind a wall or in the top of a fort or something like that. It just takes away the fantasy of doing what you're doing, because ultimately this game is an RPG. I think it was Bashiok who said, he was talking about this example of going into a keep, then going into some jail or opening a stockade, and he was saying, so you you walk in, you blind a guard, you stun another one, you kill his friend, you pull a whole bunch of them, murder them all, get your way down in, rescue the prisoners, make a daring escape. That's the fantasy that's going on in your head. Now, is that exact fantasy going on in your head? No, absolutely not. But on a small scale, that's kind of what you're thinking, you're traversing the world, you're killing enemies, you're freeing those dudes, and then you're done. Now, there's a fundamental difference between that and you flew up, you found, you hovered right above where you needed to go, you flew down, you right-clicked, you flew up again. It takes away the fantasy, and I think the removal of flying in Draenor is really going to help out in that regard. Then, oh wow, my computer went to sleep. Thanks, computer. Anyway, as I was saying, the removal of flying is going to just make it so that you're really down in there, you're in the nitty-gritty, you're experiencing the zones. If you are, say, just even running past a particularly cool tree on your ground mount, well, what's going to happen is that tree will be looming over you, and it'll be like, whoa, yeah, I'm down in this world, instead of flying above it, seeing nothing and doing nothing. Especially in a zone like the Spires of Iraq, I think it would actually be ruined by flying. A part of the fantasy of the Spires, I suppose, is you being this tiny little thing surrounded by these spires with crazy bird people and stuff, and being able to fly and mitigating that whole design just might ruin the zone. So overall, that's kind of what I think about flying. TLDR, the lack of it is going to help a great deal with quest flow and that kind of thing. And then, of course, I'd imagine that they will design zones with the flying completely, okay, so, or not, the non-flying even so. The paths through zones on all those various things will make sense. They won't have mobs sitting on them just to gank you or anything like that. And then, of course, the flight points are going to be much better. They've said that they're essentially going to be from point A to point B, direct flight points. Far more as the crow flies, rather than, say, the scenic route that we currently take. Anyway, so that's basically it for the video. I just thought that questing is going to change in Draenor. We know a decent amount of information at the minute, and I may as well let people know what I think and have a little bit of a chat about it. So that's what this has been. Let me know what you're thinking about questing. Are you looking forward to it? And also, what was your favorite questing experience in a prior expansion? Was it Pandaria? Was it Vanilla? Was it Burning Crusade, Wrath, etc.? I'd love to know. Anyway, that's it for the video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.